look, I know Quentin Tarantino is not in the internet's good graces right now, and that's probably for good reason, but the fact of the matter is the man knows how to make a damn good movie, at least if Kill Bill is any indication of that. Now, I had the pleasure last night of seeing Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair, the uncut, unrated, remastered, re-released version of his original duo of films that he released in 2003 and 2004, and it was so not what I expected. There are really three things that struck me about the film particularly. The first being just how unapologetically goofy it is. There's a lot of these elements, especially of the sound design, that are they're such cliches of the comedy action genre. And I think the reason why they come off so corny is because they've been so overused now. But I can only assume that Kill Bill was really the first time that these elements were used. At least it gives off that impression. I feel like no director would go and use these crazy, goofy, like siren sounds and just wild, over-the-top, action sound effects, whooshes and punches and hits. It's just so goofy and comedic, which is clearly on purpose, but I think that oftentimes directors would be sort of mocked or ridiculed for using those things now, but this is clearly the first time that they'd been used, and so it has a really interesting vibe to it. These fight scenes, they're super well choreographed, of course, in the tradition of these samurai movies of earlier centuries, and then there's a lot of Seven Samurai in there. Quentin Tarantino dedicated the movie to a famous Japanese director as well, and so obviously there's a lot of this incredible choreography, but aside from that, it's just got a very hilarious slapstick Jackie Chan style vibe to it. And it's funny because people often talk about how like dark and violent Quentin Tarantino can be as a director. I'm not sure about dark. Like obviously there's a ton of violence and gore here, but there's not like a feeling of darkness really in most of his work. Like there aren't very many moments in this movie that are like scary, really, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing that feels sinister because all of this like super hyper stylized bloody gory action isn't it's not like intense and dark and dramatic. It's just really goofy. And of course, the things that make it that way is obviously the sound design, like the crazy whooshes and punches and hits. The gore is obviously so over the top. That's the thing that it kind of pisses me off when people are like, oh, Quentin Tarantino is like so disgusting and bloody. It's like, yeah, okay, there are moments here that are absolutely disgusting, but the gore is so over the top that it isn't really like... It isn't like traumatizing. Like it's not affecting. Like you aren't watching this and being like, oh, that was a horrible bloody image that's gonna stick with me forever. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm not gonna show this to my little sisters, but like the gore is like someone's head gets chopped off and there's a literal fountain of blood spraying out of their neck. Like that's not realistic. That's not the sort of thing you look at and be like, man, that was a grisly image. You know what I mean? No, it's just like, yeah, this is goofy over the top violence. And there's moments here where it is mindful, where the violence is disgusting and you're like, oh, that's terrible. You know what I mean? Like you're supposed to be like, that's not good. But most of it is just for the sake of these over-the-top action sequences that A, are entertaining because they're really well done, and B, the violence has a couple of different reasons. One to be, and I've heard Tarantino talk about this when he was talking about Django Unchained, where it's like you have cathartic violence where it's like, this is meant to show you how terrible this is, and then you have violence that is, blood for blood. Like the point is that she's taking revenge, and so you're supposed to be kind of satisfied there, right? And we'll get into kind of the philosophy of what that is and kind of what I think about that later, but you're supposed to enjoy it to a certain extent because she is kind of enacting righteous revenge. She is just in her mission to kill these people, and so you're supposed to sort of be satisfied by it. And the other thing that also is so interesting and goofy about the film is the music choices. There's so many needle drops that just like start and end. There's so many songs that Quentin Tarantino uses, and the entire film just kind of gives off this vibe that's very clearly he really enjoys making this, and it's something that he's making because he's going to enjoy watching it, right? And if you've seen anything that he's said on the internet, any of his interviews, you know that like he's very like into his own work, and so like he's clearly making these movies because they're going to be something he'll enjoy watching, right? And of course we enjoy watching it too, but it's like there's just this overwhelming vibe that's like he's making it the way he wants to make it because he knows that he's going to have a good time watching it at some point. The second thing I wanted to talk about is kind of just the status of this film and really all of Tarantino's films as being a cult classic. Shout out to Diego and Ashlyn, who I chatted with a little bit during the intermission, and who pointed out to me many of the glaring blind spots that I have in the films that I've watched. I will go watch The Godfather at some point. But they'd asked me, they were wondering why so many men like Kill Bill, and I don't know if I'd necessarily heard of the stereotype of men specifically liking it, and of course there's a couple of different theories there, one being just that men are actually a lot better intrinsically than we think they might be, and just like to see a woman being badass and actually being an independent and being able to think for herself, or B, men are just a lot more horny than they give off, and just really like to watch an attractive woman beating the shit out of a bunch of unsuspecting martial artists. Anyway, the Quentin Tarantino vibe is something that's really, really interesting, and I'm sure has been studied a lot more than I'm going to analyze it here. But I think one of the key things that really contributes to this is just kind of the QT look. There's a look to these films that is really, really, low-key actually really beautiful. And there were moments here where I was like, this kind of looks like a Wes Anderson movie almost. There's these bright colors that really pop out, most notably in that beginning scene where the bride goes to the house of the one woman and just kind of, they have that crazy all-out brawl in her living room. There's a shot of the front yard of that house that's so beautiful. Like, the colors are so bright and lovely, and I was like, I guess you just don't really expect that from this kind of director, because it's not like he's necessarily known for his color palette, but there's a vibrancy to these colors that just is really, really aesthetic. Another thing that he does, Quentin Tarantino always has done, is that he shoots on really low-speed film. And this isn't actually film that's really easy to get anymore, especially not in 70mm, but he would always shoot on like 100 speed or 200 speed film stock, which means that the film is really naturally very dark, so you have to light the scenes a ton. So that's why you get this really high-key, high-contrast look in all of these scenes. It's because he's shooting on really low-speed film, so they really had to light the hell out of each of these scenes. So, like, if you'd look at behind-the-scenes photos, you'd probably see a lot of really, really bright lighting, right? Like, in real life, it'd be, like, too bright, you know what I mean? It's just because the film stock's so low. And because of that, you get really harsh contrast, you get, like, really bright highlights on these characters, and that's why you get this, like, very bright, vibrant look, right? It's vibrancy that we're looking at here, not necessarily, like, saturation, right? Like, Wes Anderson's look is really saturated colors, a lot of different colors going on, a complicated color palette, whereas what you have in Tarantino's work is a lot of vibrancy, right? There's clearly a lot of light going on, and because of that, there's a lot of contrast between the shadows and the highlights. And he obviously likes contrast because we get a lot of these super cool shots where there's just a colored background and a black silhouette of our characters, right? So there's just it's a very stylized look. It's very Tarantino, right? Because of that low speed film and because of the bright lighting and just the bright colors that he likes to have. Another thing, obviously, is the foot shots. And what I noticed here is that the foot shots, contrary to what I expected, really actually move the plot along, right? Like, there's some moments where it's gratuitous, certainly. I mean, there's literally hundreds of shots of people's feet in this film, but most of the time, the foot shots actually served a purpose. I mean, we obviously have the iconic wiggle your big toe scene. That was important. We had the moment where there's a lingering shot of her feet as she's taking her cowboy boots off in the coffin, right? Well, there's a reason for that, because she needs to be able to free her feet from those enclosures so that she can grab the knife that she has inside the boot, right? Like, there's a lot of moments where the foot shot actually matters. Squishing the eyeball underneath her foot. I mean, that's a triumphant moment right there. So, I mean, it's kind of gross at the same time, as are all of these shots of people's bare feet, but the foot shots did actually serve a purpose. And there was a lot more, too. Like, I feel like there was a lot of moments where I was like, okay, that makes sense. I understand why there's a foot shot right now. But anyway, that all goes to show that the Quentin Tarantino vibe, the Quentin Tarantino look is obviously present here, and I think it's really cool. And the thing about it being a cult classic, and I think the reason why this is so, is because the film is clearly very well done. It's edited in a really interesting way. He's using all sorts of different techniques. He's pulling out all the stops, you know, taking from earlier Japanese cinema. And as a result, the film comes off as artistic enough to be appreciated by cinephiles, but still just fun as hell. You know what I mean? Like, the viewers are still having an entertaining time with the film, but they can also, you know, the pretentious people, me, can go and be like, oh, you know, there was all this going on, and it's still very artistic. So since it kind of like bridges that gap, you know, it walks that line between being like an artistic film and just being a fun film, I think that's the reason why it's so widely regarded among, you know, the film bro sphere of people. The final thing that I wanted to highlight is just how incredibly interesting the film is. And this is where I was really taken by surprise. The first half of the movie is just very slapstick, crazy action. It's very stylized, it's fun, but there's not much depth. And I came away from that first half just thinking, all right, that's cool. Like, there's a lot of technical elements here that are worth being excited about, but there's not much philosophically or like mentally that's really very interesting. But when the second half came around, I was really struck by just how cool of a concept the film really is. There's a lot of philosophies that are ping-ponging around here. There's a lot of different worldviews that are going on. It's a stylistic grab bag of a lot of different things, right? Like, Tarantino has so many different influences that are very clear here, right? Because the movie is unapologetically modern, it's set in California, and then it's also, influenced by these Japanese movies, and there's a lot of kung fu and martial arts that's going on. And so there's a lot of different influences that are going on here, which there's a lot of spiritual influences as well, which are really, really interesting. The philosophical concepts that are thrown out, one of them being the idea of these people being sort of like born killers and they can't really change. While not being something that I necessarily agree with, I don't think it's a fundamentally true philosophy. It is fundamentally interesting. When Bill talks about this idea of, I'm a born killer, that's just how I am, I'm not going to be able to change, and neither are you, talking to the bride, this is just a really interesting turning point in the movie where he kind of is saying, I did this to you because, you'd never be able to change, right? And you get the impression that the bride wants to be able to change, but she even admits to herself that she didn't think she was going to be able to, right? So it's a really interesting idea of these assassins being people who are brought up from a young age to be this way, and it just being impossible for them to be able to find redemption. However, by the end of the film, we see that the opposite is true. And that's the other thing that I really like, is one of the fundamental truths that's brought out by the very end, is how the entire film ends, is this connection between a mother and a daughter, right? The motherly love that the bride feels totally transcends, this wicked upbringing that she's had and the terrible things that she's done, right? The fact that she has a daughter and she loves her daughter above all else is the most important thing. And that's a fundamental truth. That's something that I came away with. Like, it was actually really heartwarming. It was like, wow, okay, this actually means something, right? You start to feel something. When she sees her daughter for the first time, that's actually an emotional moment. And the final thing that I thought was really interesting is the bride's moment in her bathroom where her child is watching TV. She's just lying on the floor, crying and saying thank you. And I thought to myself, who is she thanking? She's looking up at the heavens, and it seems to me that she's thanking God for reuniting her with her daughter, for allowing her to kill all these people. And that's just really interesting. It's very ambiguous, it's very subtle, but to me, it's a little bit of a hint at something deeper. Now, again, I don't necessarily agree with all of this, right? Because I don't think necessarily that whatever God she believes in would necessarily be okay with her going out and massacring all these people. But there is a concept here of righteous revenge, and there's a concept here that's really interesting. It's something that's worth thinking about. And that was a moment there where I was like, okay, there's something deeper going on here, right? This is more than just a slapstick comedy action film. This is more than just, a stylized, gory, bro cinema, enjoyable time at the movies. There's something actually going on here with the writing, and it's a story that actually has some depth to it. I haven't necessarily unpacked what that depth is, but the fact remains that it is something that's worth thinking about. So I guess this is the beginning of my journey into Tarantino's filmography. There's plenty of things that I don't like about him as a person, as far as the internet can inform me of that. There's plenty of things that I don't like about some of his choices when it comes to the things that he puts in his films. But there's something that's really, really inspiring about the way that he makes movies. And that's something that I haven't necessarily been able to find anywhere else. And that inspiration for me as a filmmaker is really, really valuable. So, I'm going to give Kill Bill: The Whole Bloody Affair 4 out of 5 stars. It's a very unique film in my mind, a great time at the movies, and it sort of marks a milestone for me in my journey into cinema as an art form. I'm really, really excited to see what else this art has to offer for us as human beings, and all the many ways that it can educate, inspire, and edify us. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one.